pero sus colores han ido cambiando mi mundo.
Hey guys, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about something that I did in February of this year. For those of you that don't know, in February, the Dominican Republic went through a series of protests. I wanted to talk about what it was like to protest abroad. Before I decided to protest, I wanted to, but I wasn't sure if I should, if I could, if it would risk my residency, if it was safe, if it was my place, all of those questions that I had. And I remember looking around on the internet for like tips, articles that answer that question of should I protest as a foreigner in another country? And I couldn't find a lot. So I wanted to make this video telling you about those questions that I had and how my thought process was and how I decided to go and what it was like. I have some footage from back at the protest. So we'll get started. So background information. This happened in mid to end of February of this year, 2020. The cause of the protest was the cancellation of the elections. The Dominican Republic government has a history of corruption, and the country itself has a pretty recent history of dictatorship. So it wasn't until like the late 60s, early 70s that the country finally ended a many decades long dictatorship. So it's a fragile democracy, as many democracies are. So what happened was that the elections were being held, and about like a few hours into the morning, the government suspended the elections. This was the first time that they were using an electronic voting system. It wasn't electronically tallied. It was a tablet where you would choose, and then it would print out a paper ballot for you. So it wasn't being electronically counted. It was still being counted by people. But the problem was that some candidates' faces were not appearing on the screen, some were not appearing as options, some appeared on a second page. It was rumored to be purposefully rigged by the current party in power. It is very much in power. It has something like 75% or more of the Congress, and the current president is also from that party. The protest was mostly about democracy, fighting for the fact that you can't cancel elections, but also against that political party. I don't know if that was ever proven or not. I doubt it was. We're fighting for three main things. One, like the big overall theme was democracy, right? Like this is a free country with elections and it needs to stay that way. Number two was against the political party that was rumored to have been behind the issue with the automatic voting, and to demand the resignation of the current leader of the Junta Central Electoral, which is the electoral board. And then there was also an element of these electronic voting machines cost millions and millions and millions of pesos, like so much money. For the obvious reasons, they couldn't reuse them in the second round because no one could trust that it wasn't going to be rigged again. But also, the machines cost so much taxpayer money. So, how did I decide to protest? The protest started out as pretty small. By the time Thursday hit, the protests were big, and they were growing in number every day. I wanted to go, but I still wasn't sure, and I also knew that I had to get to work really early. So I decided that I would go on Friday, but I had a lot of questions about whether I should even be going. Like, was it my space to be in a protest that wasn't for my country? Was it safe for me? The day before I decided to go, people got tear gassed, which luckily didn't happen after the fact, and the police officer that tear gassed the protesters was fired because it wasn't authorized. So it wasn't so much about safety, like was I gonna get hurt? It was more about is my residency going to be taken away? Like, if I, like, are they going to arrest people? Like, with more people, is it going to get violent? Like, I've never protested in this country, and it's been a long time since this country has had protests. And so I didn't know what it, like, I didn't know. So I did question whether it was safe, but I also felt like I have an obligation to go. My husband didn't really like the idea of me going. He's really protective, especially because I do live in another country and I don't look like the people here, and he's just protective, as any husband would be. But I convinced him to go with me. What did I consider before deciding to go? I considered the fact that I knew it would be really big on Friday. And that the numbers kept growing, and I wanted the numbers to keep growing, and I wanted to be a part of that. I also felt that in numbers I was safer. If everyone was doing it, it wasn't as dangerous. And I also considered that if I had my husband with me, it would be okay. I considered, did we have a way to get there? You couldn't really drive there because it was in like this roundabout street, essentially. There was nowhere to park. The only thing that was an option for transportation was some of the like privately owned buses. The public buses and the metro, which is run by the government, were not letting people on if they were dressed in all black. What else did I consider? I considered whether it was my place to protest in a country that isn't mine. So why did I choose to participate in the end? Even though this country isn't technically mine, it will be my kids' country, and it's my students' country. I believe in democracy everywhere. I also knew that this had happened in other countries in Latin America and around the world. This is how Venezuela started, that the elections got rigged, and we all know what happened after that. Like, I didn't want this country to fall into that. For as long as I live here, I am obligated to fight for this country because this country and its people have accepted me. It is my home right now. And even though I have a place that I could run to if things got bad, nobody else does. So yeah, it really wasn't a question of if, it became just a question of how. So I went on Friday, and then the next week was Independence Day, and there was this huge protest planned. So the first one that I went to on Friday, that was more like a protest. And it was nighttime, there was police, there was, like, everything was guarded off, and then the Independence Day one was more like a rally. There was a stage and people singing, and they were singing like Dominican anthems and things like that. It wasn't like a concert inappropriate or anything, but it was more planned, and it was like the Women's March, you know, where there were people on stage and things like that. It wasn't a spontaneous, like, any sort of danger protest. So that one I didn't really feel like I stood out as much because there were so many people that, like, who cared? So on Friday I went with my husband and I met up with one of my friends there. And the Independence Day one, I went with plans to meet up with some of my friends, but like I said, it was so big that it was impossible to find them. The signal was blocked. There was no cell phone signal at all in the protest. No one knows if that was on purpose or if it was just because there were so many people there, but I couldn't contact him, right? That was why it was impossible to find anybody. I ended up running into a lot of people I worked with, so I spent the protest with different coworkers. How did it feel? It felt a little weird. I felt out of place. I definitely was like, are people gonna know I'm American? Like obviously they are. They're gonna look at me and be like, well, look at that gringa. But I didn't know if that would offend people or if they would be glad or if they would wonder if I was a tourist or, I definitely, like, when there was a lot of news cameras and stuff, and I was like, if I appear on one of those, like, I'm gonna look really out of place. And the whole time at the beginning, like they were chanting things in Spanish. I'm bilingual, but it still just felt weird. Like it didn't feel like it was like my words, you know. I'm glad I went. In the end, the protest demands were kind of met. The elections were held. So yeah, that's what it was like to protest abroad. If you have any questions, you can leave them down in the comments for me. I'd be happy to answer. It was a great experience, and I will always protest for this country. So I'll see you next time. Bye.
Voy a cantar esta canción con mucho cariño de mi corazón a la República Dominicana, la casa del merengue y la casa de la bachata. Voy a cantar esta canción con mucho cariño de mi corazón a la República Dominicana, la casa del merengue y la casa de la bachata. La, 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 la casa del merengue.